Once again, it is the 26th of July, it's approaching the summertime, and every single time, without doubt, it gets to be a very difficult time to process emotionally when you run out of responsibility for an extended period of time. And I would argue that that's because, in most part, the summertime, when you finish school or when you finish university or college, whatever, you have a long period of time where you don't have to do anything. So then you start to wonder, what should you do? And you start to wonder if there's any meaning to doing anything at all. I think not everyone does. I mean, most people are fine with it, but a lot of people start to get into a very existential state where they're questioning the meaning of their being and whether it's relevant or not. A lot of the time, that can be triggered just by past thoughts being brought to light. So thinking about existentialism in the past, even when you're in a pretty meaningful point in your life, by videos such as the ones by Kurzgesagt, where they talk about how the universe, you as a person in the universe, will not matter eventually because in billions of years, anything you do now won't matter. And you can bring that to the shorter thing and say, like, hey, when you're 80, say if you die at like 80, if you die at 80, whatever happens after your death doesn't matter. So that's like obviously under the assumption that you won't have an afterlife. So it dismisses like religious assumptions, which I think you can do because it's an assumption, but you also have to dismiss the assumption that you will die and be gone forever. So basically, I wanted to talk about my response to this video that I just watched, because hey, I think that why not? It gave me some thoughts, and I disagree with the overall message that it's trying to convey for a different reason to what it's trying to convey. Towards the end, they kind of just say, hey, nothing matters, so you might as well be a good person. And I think that that's like contradictory. You can't extract the information that you should be a good person simply out of the fact that nothing matters. It doesn't. Saying nothing matters, therefore you should be good. It's like, well, why would being good matter? You know, they don't address that. So this is what I wanted to talk about in my response. This is from a fucking document that I made that is of just fucking notes that I've written for myself. There's 50 pages of notes here, or 40,000 words, which is when I compile it all together and realize that I've written this much shit for YouTube and getting my thoughts straight, I realized, yeah, I might be turning into L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who gave himself therapy by writing the entire law and doctrine of Scientology. That's not a good thing, really, but you know, the 39,000 words, that's half of the first Harry Potter book. And I've written things that are longer than that, but they had less significance than this, or they were less well thought out. That was just mostly me. I won't even get into that, right? So, from my understanding, the video attempts to make deterministic conclusions on how to act from assumptions and a lack of information, which I don't think you can do. There may be verifiable reasons to many existential why things are the way they are that we don't know. We don't have the information to determine why things are the way they are, so you can't meaningfully act upon this mystery with an answer that just supposes that they're true. I mean, this goes both ways. You can't take inaction on the assumption that an action doesn't matter. Or you can't say, well, I think things are the way this way, so I'm just going to act as if that's true, because you can't know. You need to act on things with as much actual evidence to support it as possible. And I would argue that internal emotional evidence, as well as scientific evidence are sort of just enough to get you by, but when you're talking about way more abstract things, you can't just skim over assumptions. So the video suggests that their scale of time and future predictions are correct. So for example, humanity will definitely die at some point in the lifespan of the universe. Therefore, because the future and after that future doesn't matter, that the present or now doesn't matter either. I don't think you can draw that conclusion because it isn't verifiable that that there will be no life for no afterlife for human individuals. You can say, well, it's pretty clear that God doesn't exist, but it isn't clear that there isn't such a thing. I would say personally, I don't feel as if there is a deity. I don't feel like there is an afterlife. I don't feel as if any of that's real, and there's no scientific evidence to provided to say that there is or isn't one. So, like, making this assumption doesn't let you just say, well, I've assumed this, therefore everything else I say has significance. They also assume that we'll never build technology to escape this universe, which I think is silly to do, because you can say, well, based on our current understanding of physics, it's impossible, but that's based on our current understanding. I mean, you can only act on your current understanding, which is what I was saying before. You can't act on an understanding you don't have. But knowing that you don't have the understanding puts you in a real awkward position where you're making a deterministic answer now that just shouldn't. It isn't relevant to say that the future won't matter, or that the present doesn't matter because the future won't matter, despite not knowing that whether the future would matter. Like, things, maybe things don't matter now, but they might in the future. That's one way of looking at it. You might scientifically find evidence that disproves nihilism, or you might find evidence that proves nihilism, but you shouldn't necessarily be acting as if it doesn't. I'll explain why further down, but the importance here is upon taking action and approaching this in a way that you can manifest, because otherwise there isn't any value in the statement in the first place. The other assumption is that the human species in this universe are not a computer simulation. So this could be also possible. It's more likely that this is the case, which would mean that saying that things don't matter doesn't even matter, or that our existence and what we do doesn't matter because it's a simulation. It's like, well, then it matters within the simulation, or it matters within the time span of the simulation that we're in. So yeah, like I said, making arbitrary decisions like this doesn't seem practical, and practicality is what's important, because you can't map your actions onto useful application if you're not able to determine what's practical. So now, what I suggested before is it might seem like a way of a thing of waiting for the truth to come along, and then just doing nothing, or just acting the way you're acting until the truth comes along, and it's like, what's wrong with that? You either look for the truth, or you wait for someone else to find the truth in regards to this kind of scenario. But it doesn't provide you with a much use, because you are eliminating a lot of the infinite possible interpretations of the universe that we perceive by taking someone else's perspective and then saying, hey, that's what I'm gonna believe, but I can't act on it. So I just don't think it's useful to do that. And like I said, that's just me saying what I think, but there's evidence in biology to suggest that doesn't work. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Saying that right and wrong exist, or that what is right or wrong to do is based on the results of the action and how any affected being responds to this. We are biased towards preferring things which benefit ourselves or our species and have somewhat decent understanding of what is beneficial to us and what is not. That is relative to our survival and the reduction of suffering. So if you take into account this biological fact, which helps us, that our interests and the way we perceive the world is from the perspective of wanting to reduce suffering and to survive, then you can determine that based on just this alone, that nihilism doesn't fulfill this. Then you say, well, this being fulfilled doesn't matter because from the cosmological perspective, nothing matters. The cosmos doesn't care how we act, even if we care, even if the species cares, even if other animals seem to react badly to the way we act, even if all of that happens to be true, it's also true that the cosmos doesn't care. Well, hang on a second, you don't know that the cosmos doesn't care. That's just another assumption. That I'm saying, like, you really need to know that the cosmos doesn't care if you're gonna say that the cosmos doesn't care, and then if you're gonna try to act as if the cosmos doesn't care. So then let's just try and dismiss that, because if you're saying that the cosmos doesn't care, you made a really big assumption that I don't think is valid enough to go with. And even if you do, let's see how far it gets you, right? So as long as humans exist and we have our non-arbitrary interpretations of right and wrong, we can actually use that as a guide to action. So you can say that right and wrong are just social constructs, but it's a very practical, biological and emotional response to things around us. We've evolved to have our interpretation of right and wrong, and I don't mean this purely from the sense of, when you tell somebody that's right and wrong and they say, hey, well, I disagree with you, that proves that it's arbitrary. It's because it's not. Like, one person is correct about what is right and what is wrong relative to them based on their experience. So that as a guide for action matters evolutionarily, biologically, and that is what matters, as opposed to the non-human interpretation, which doesn't or shouldn't matter to humans because it can't help us to follow it. So if you follow, like, if you say, oh, what does the cosmos want me to do, rather than what do I want me to do, what does my body want me to do, what does my society want me to do, the cosmos isn't going to tell you. So therefore you can't take action from it. You say, well, the act of taking action doesn't matter. But it does, because that's kind of all you can do, unless you do nothing. But can you do nothing? You can't do nothing. You could forcibly sit still and do that, but that is something, and eventually you will respond in a way that your body determines matters, or the society will determine matters. So that is, right, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So if it's good for a human, it's good. If it's bad for a human, it's bad. And we've evolved neurologically to determine what we want and don't want, or what upsets us and what makes us feel good. We know that, and even if we don't, try a couple of things and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. So, of course it doesn't matter on a macroscopic scale, but the macroscopic scale doesn't matter to us, right? That's what I'm trying to suggest here, because there isn't evidence to suggest that we don't actually matter. It's just a supposition, and if it doesn't provide us with any way to act, then it's actually a useless supposition. This in particular isn't my my own hypothesis. This is just the way I understand, or the way I've interpreted what Jordan B. Peterson from Jordan B. Peterson, I don't know his channel, what he argues is that basically, that statement that you need a way to act, and that existentialism and nihilism doesn't provide you with any of those. So, it's a nice thought exercise, but it doesn't actually do much. So, they're also... your actions right now have no consequences that can easily be measured in 1 million years or 1 billion years, is what the video was supposing. But once again, there's too much assumption there. This assumes that this stance is factually correct, whilst also not providing any way to act upon this information other than by stating that you can decide what you do and do it, without also stating, from their own implication, that doing nothing would also be a viable alternative. The video states that you can take away the significance and meaning in life, but still have a reason to act upon your instinctive desires. So I get what they're trying to say here with the video. They're trying to say, hey, it doesn't matter that nothing matters, because you can still have fun. But if you realize that, in the most true sense, that nothing matters, even having fun won't matter, and you won't, and there's no benefit to having fun if having fun doesn't matter. So it doesn't really answer the question. It just says, hey, maybe you should do this despite the fact that we just told you that you shouldn't. It's very contradictory, I would say. It doesn't mention either that you will run into limits while exercising that mode of being. So, for example, you can't just do everything you want to do, because many things that you probably want aren't physically possible. Let's say you want to just, I don't know, you want to be made of cheese and teleport around the world. Just something just so random like that. You say, well, it's not physically possible for you to do that. And even if that is physically possible for you to be cheese and teleport, then just pick something else that's just as crazy. There are physical limitations, there are social limitations, there are financial limitations, there are legal limitations, there are limitations to what you can do. It doesn't mention that in the video. I think maybe they assume they don't have to, but when you're talking so abstractly about doing what you want to do, you kind of missing out on the fact that you can't do what you want to do, and that there are limitations. You can't pretend there aren't, because the limitations govern what you can actually do. The limitations also suggest what you should do, to some extent, which is also, once again, not mentioned in the video. So as you're further limited by more and more factors, well, they'll say it doesn't matter. They'll say nothing matters. Your limitations don't matter either. Neither does your existence as a whole. And if your existence doesn't matter to the cosmos or to you, then you have to probably also believe it doesn't matter to other people around you. And if you truly are a believer in the nihilistic philosophy, then you probably feel as if every other person should agree with you, and that no other person's existence matters. Now, this is something that I can understand, that if you come to the conclusion that everybody doesn't matter because you don't matter and nothing matters, when you try to tell somebody, hey, you know that you don't matter and nothing matters, you expect them to believe you and take your word for it. And that you would expect that if you were to do anything and then say afterwards, hey, well, you know, what I did doesn't matter because nothing matters, that would justify it to them. But this really isn't the case, and you obviously know that there are plenty of people who would disagree. You would go up to somebody, kick them in the face, or punch them in the face, because not everyone has the flexibility to kick a face. Go up to somebody, punch them in the face, and say, hey, that doesn't matter, because nothing matters. They're gonna respond as if what you did matters. And don't say, that's no evidence to say that it does matter, because it kind of is. You know, someone acting as if it matters, as opposed to if everybody was acting as if it didn't matter. Because if you act as if it doesn't matter, you can't act. That's basically what I'm trying to get at. But you can think your own existence doesn't matter from a cosmological perspective, and that no one else's does. From the perspective of the people, you do matter, and they matter to themselves too. So why would you assume that it's correct to take the cosmological perspective over the perspective of another person's? And basically, this is a real question. How can you determine that one viewpoint is correct and another is incorrect? If it's so subjective, and if nothing matters at all, how can you say that your perspective in that nothing matters matters? You're just getting to a bunch of awkward paradoxes once you reach that point. And there's definitely not enough evidence to support the view that we will as a species definitely die out. Like I mentioned before, we could invent technology to keep hopping from universe to universe within the multiverse to propagate forever. Or, and this is just genuinely potential, there could be an afterlife. Or, when the simulation is over, the simulation could be repeated. Like, say we're in a computer simulation, the simulation could be repeated, and you maybe get your memories back. You know, you get to start at the max level again. You know, start from where you left off. You don't know. So don't try and use this knowledge that heat death of the universe will kill everything, nothing will matter in the future, because that isn't even true. Can't base nihilism on that fact alone. And you can't say that because your own life will end in about 90 years, let's get back to a smaller scale, that what you do doesn't matter to you in the long run, and that it doesn't matter to others, because it definitely does matter to them if it impacts them and they care. They will act as if they care. And you can of course argue that you can genuinely make the statement like that is, I don't care about what other people think, because I think nothing matters, and that is the truth. You're kind of proving that your own stance matters in some sense by elevating yourself above them. Or maybe if nothing matters, why are you trying to? Why do you not care? Why are you acting in such a? It's very difficult to process this, but it does follow some sense. The only thing this proves, though, is that you have a flaw in your social skills. You're kind of being a dick. You know, like I say, if you punch somebody and then say, well, it didn't matter that I punched you because nothing matters, it's just a dick move, really. And, I mean, to say it's a dick move isn't enough of a reason to dismiss it, but it doesn't have any weight in supporting the argument of nihilism, is basically the point I'm trying to get to here. And so without any clear evidence to support the futility of human effort, it can't be claimed that it matters or doesn't matter over the long term. But it can certainly be evidence that the short term matters, as we've evolved to act or to react to our world and knowledge as if it does matter. So the actions that we do aren't really actions necessarily exclusively that come from us. They are reactions from the universe and our perceptions of it. Reactions, as opposed to just coming from you, which I think is probably the main cause of this. People who think that actions come from them, or actions are reactions to their perceptions. And because you can react to perception in a limited number of ways, but you can act out also with a limited number of ways, but different limitations, conflicts of desire that the biological perspective just suggests that we do matter, and it cannot be stated in any other perspective is valid enough to be acted upon. An example, the nihilistic conclusions can't be acted upon, and I would also say that neither can faith in afterlife as consequences be acted upon, really, but at least it gives you something to do. I say, well, it doesn't matter that it gives you something to do, but like I've said, you need to have action, otherwise what's going on? You can't act as if things don't matter. You can say that you believe it, but the act of doing so is just a result of you thinking it matters enough to make the statement. If it truly doesn't matter, and you truly do not matter, and nothing matters, then nothing can happen. The only way to appropriately respond to this belief would to not be, but the state of not being, from once being, through the belief that being doesn't matter, wouldn't matter. That sounds complicated, or it just sounds superfluous, but that's a valid sentence I wrote. It kind of just says, like, if you kill yourself, you're saying that killing yourself matters, and if you do nothing, you're saying that doing it's literally a paradox. You can only respond to the paradox of the supposition. You can't act as if nothing matters, because you prove that acting as if it doesn't matter matters. I'll just keep saying it because it sounds stupid, but if your actions contradict your stated beliefs, that is a possibility, but it does create dissonance, and it's pretty self-destructive to just continue believing that, to think that you don't matter whilst constantly proving and acting as if you matter. Like, you constantly act as if you matter, whilst believing that you don't. You're just going to get upset. And I'd say, hey, you don't want to get upset. It's not fun. And your fun matters, but it doesn't. No, but it does biologically. You know, you want to have fun. I'm not saying that just because you want to have fun it matters, but I'm saying that it doesn't not matter. So if your actions, I read that one. I said it's worth thinking about it as an exercise, maybe. Think about existentialism, because it kind of reveals some truth, and it gives you, it can motivate you thinking about it, but it doesn't actually provide you any useful way of being, so it can't actually be manifested. So to put it really simply, not mattering doesn't matter. And then the next video I make after this one, I'm going to discuss what matters, based on the principle that you don't get to decide whether touching a hot stove causes you to feel pain or not. You can't just decide the pain away. It's not arbitrary, and so basically nothing else is, because there are guaranteed consequences to take place regardless of your stance on whether they should influence you or not. I'm just going to read it now, why not? You can act as if your actions don't have significant consequences. You can say by your own word that you define being as significant to you as an individual. That's sure, that's fine, but you don't get to decide what matters and what doesn't matter, because your body and your society and the universe won't let you do that. Like, you'll just be fighting against you'll just be fighting against the fundamentals of everything, and fighting against that, I would argue, is futile. So trying to act out what matters, saying it doesn't matter, or trying to decide that your interpretation of matter is exclusively valid, it just gets course corrected constantly and shaped to the point where, hey, this is all that works. Like, there's a broad range of what works, but it's not as broad as the scope of fucking everything that's possible, and then everything that's impossible. There's everything that's impossible, then there's everything that's possible, and then there's everything that you can do. And it's like, you've got to bring it down to that level, and then that's your influence for action. Now, I hope this video was clear. Obviously it wasn't clear whatsoever, but I've been trying to improve upon my communication skills. Like I said, I've been trying to write shit down, as I mentioned before. I've got a bunch of notes here. I've got a bunch of notes here to refer to. I've got like 40,000 words worth of notes. Most of them I won't be reading because I think they wouldn't make a good enough video yet, but get it written down, come back to it, revise it over and over again, and we'll see. Yeah, so if you want to see any more of these kind of videos, or those ones that I'm proposing, then click subscribe, hit that fucking like button, and come back for more Zirkzank Says. Every time I have that existential crisis and I decide to make videos because my life isn't fulfilling enough, that I have to be doing something productive, creative in some sense, thinking and then sharing the thoughts has to be done, and that'll motivate me to keep making more videos. So if you enjoy it, thanks for watching, and try and watch more when I make them.